Ron Blair, and we have made it here again. As a Chicago native, it's an honor to have the opportunity to introduce today's keynote speaker. Author, higher ed advocate, passionate leader, and native of Chicago, my new aunt from Chicago. Ms. Cheryl Hyman is a nationally recognized executive leader and expert in higher education and educational transformation. As the Chancellor of the City of Chicago, City College of Chicago, she was responsible for managing a $700 million budget, overseeing 5,500 employees, and ensuring the success of more than 100,000 students annually. Appointed by Mayor Richard M. Daley in 2010 and reappointed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel a year later, Hyman led the Reinvention Initiative at City College of Chicago in partnership with faculty, staff, students, four-year colleges, and members of the civic and business communities to ensure that all CCC students successfully graduate, ready for further college and careers. During her tenure, CCC's graduating rate more than doubled and degrees awarded annually were the highest on record in the system's history. She launched College to Careers, which partners faculty and staff with more than 150 industry leaders and universities to better prepare their students for career and fast-growing fields. Hyman oversaw a balanced budget each year of her tenure with no increase in taxes, saved $70 million, launched a $524 million capital plan, and negotiated student outcome goals into her key labor agreements. Following her tenure as Chancellor, Ms. Hyman authored Reinvention, the promise and challenge of transforming a community college system. But all of this didn't come without a lot of controversy. Following Hyman, a Q&A session will be moderated by the former university president of my alma mater, Dillon University, president and CEO of UNCF, Dr. Michael Lomax. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me introduce our plenary speaker, Ms. Cheryl Hyman.
And it has been extremely impressive. I was watching it last night as I was flying in from somewhere else, and it was just, the pressure was on. It was great speakers, a great audience, and so I have to say I'm completely honored and humbled to be here with all of you all. I do feel like I'm at a big family reunion. And so I've always wanted to attend an HBCU, but I didn't, and so now I get the chance to speak to one, so a lot of them, and so I'm very humble, and thank you all for having me here today. Before we get started, now I do have a degree in computer science, and it's about to be challenged right now. So if some of this doesn't work or I don't get it right, I did graduate. It's just that I'm learning this. So before we get started, I want to show a short video.
Monday morning after the fire, Gene Kranz speaks to the team. Decades later, he can still recite the words from that day.
Spaceflight's terribly unforgiving of carelessness, incapacity, or neglect. I don't know what the Thompson Committee will find as the cause of this accident, but I know what I find. We were the cause. The simulators weren't ready. Our software and mission control didn't function. Procedures weren't complete. Nothing we did had any shelf life. And no one stood up and said, "Damn it, stop." Now, from this day forward, mission control will be known by two words: tough and confident. Tough meaning we will never again shirk from our responsibility because we're forever accountable for what we do or what we fail to do. competent, will never again take anything for granted, will never stop learning. When you leave here today, you will write these two words, tough and competent, on your blackboard, and they will never be erased. They will serve as a constant reminder to the sacrifice of Grissom, White, and Shaffy. That's all.
The man you just watched in that video was Gene Kranz. Gene Kranz served as the director at NASA on the Gemini and Apollo space missions. He delivered that speech to his mission control team the day after the ill-fated Apollo 1 mission resulted in the death of 3 astronauts. Now, Kranz found himself needing to reshape the culture at NASA after it has seemingly lost its way. His words, tough and competent, have become known as the Kranz dictum. Now, they popped into my head as I gathered my thoughts to share with you this afternoon. And I had a flashback to a prior speech that I'd given to the City Club in Chicago during my time as Chancellor. During that speech, I shared this video and talked about resilience and grit as part of my own personal journey and as part of the journey that many of the students at city colleges were taking. They, like the students who attend your institutions, are predominantly low-income, first-generation students of color. They are counting on us to help them find a foothold out of poverty. They are counting on us to help them find what is increasingly becoming their only shot at the middle class. And we cannot let them down. That's why I came here to deliver this message. Young people of color are depending on us, and it's more important than ever that Houston, we do have a problem. The share of African Americans with an associate's degree is almost 25% less than the population as a whole. Now, why is that important to the people in this room? Because as higher education costs start to rise, that degree is becoming more and more the gateway degree to your institutions. And number 2, if we're struggling to get them to complete 2-year degrees, how can they complete 4, and so on and so on? Graduation rates at 4-year historically black colleges or universities is somewhere around 37%. Now, that's much better than a lot of the community colleges that I've encountered and that I had to run, and it's much better than a lot of other institutions. But at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they top around 90%. Now, that may be an unfair comparison, but the reality is that's who the world compares you to. So we still have a problem. While more people are working, there are fewer qualified people available to fill the high-paying skilled jobs, which means our equity gaps are growing. They're not shrinking. Big problem. So if students are graduating from our 4-year institutions with degrees and soaring debt, but not many opportunities, we have a problem. And if predominantly non-minority servicing institutions have a perceived better value than our HBCUs, that's a major problem. But is purposeful disruption the answer to solve our problems? Well, that depends on how you implement it. That depends on how you receive it. That depends on how you define it. But I would argue that it's our best hope. But let's just start with the basic definition of the terms. Let's start with Merriam-Webster. They define purposeful as having or showing determination or resolve, being steadfast, single-minded, meaningful, intentional. And disruption is a disturbance that interrupts an event, activity, or process. But when the business world talks about disruption, it talks about innovations that create new markets or disrupt existing ones, not the smaller piecemeal reforms we too often focus on in higher education. So I would argue that we need to borrow from this way of thinking. But when applied to the education sector, however, purposeful disruption takes on an added meaning. First and foremost, we must be single-minded in our commitment to student success. That means we have to acknowledge that we cannot solve new challenges with old models. Old models will slow us down. Now, people often resist the idea of thinking of education as a business. But I would say that's a luxury we can no longer afford. The education market is estimated to be about $1.3 trillion, with $475 billion of that attributed to higher education. But even so, I worry that the sector does not seem to recognize that our use of outdated delivery models makes us ripe for disruption from non-traditional players. Now, if you don't think that's a real possibility, let me see everybody's hand who takes Uber. A total disruption to the transportation. Think about Amazon. Oh, I bet it's a lot of Prime members in here. Yep, me too. Yep. Look at WeWork. Look at Starbucks. These were all upstarts which managed to disrupt entire industries. But you know what the common thread among the casualties of disruption are? It's their failure to adapt quickly to change. Now, disruption has already taken place in the education sector. But somehow we think we're exempt from the type of disruption we've seen from companies like Uber, Starbucks, and we're not. And it's not too far off. The increased validity and penetration of non-traditional providers, for-profits, free online, all of that is already a challenge for us. But the question we must ask ourselves is, are we better off disrupting ourselves or having disruption thrust upon us by someone else? Are we truly ready? See, everyone wants to be a disruptor, but nobody wants to be disrupted. But piecemeal change is not disruption. Initiatives are not disruption. Pilots are not disruption. Those are not disruption. Disruption is when you create new markets. We have to start thinking about it differently. It doesn't have to be so scary. It doesn't have to be disruptive. It's about creating something new, creating new markets. Disruption is when you interrupt what's already in existence. Here's the reality. If we don't figure this out, someone else will, and our students will follow them. But my perspective is that there are 3 additional inputs required to truly drive purposeful disruption in the education sector: urgency, pace, and culture. Now, like I said earlier, we have a few problems, but having a problem is not bad. It's when you don't realize you have one that becomes bad. We can solve them. But the question is whether or not we're acting with enough urgency. Have we become too complacent because of our accomplishments? And as we act with urgency, are we being diligent about how we're benchmarking and measuring our results so that we can know if we're moving ahead or if we're falling further behind? We live in some of the most transformational changes in history. Things are changing very quickly. If you recall, I mentioned earlier that disruption requires interruption. And now if we're truly being honest, you know that the culture of higher education does not like change, especially if that change is sudden. But embracing purposeful disruption means that we have to agree to be disagreeable. We will not always agree, and we have to find different ways in this industry, in this sector, of dealing with our disagreements. If we don't, then we will miss the opportunity to infuse our solutions with diverse perspectives that can help create those new models. And additionally, we will continue to perpetuate an environment where disagreements are viewed as challenges as opposed to opportunities. And if you're only able to execute the things that everyone agrees on, then chances are you won't achieve your goals not scalable. Now, everybody may be happy, but there'll be more students left behind. When you consider what is required to drive purposeful disruption in higher education, Gene Kranz offers a thoughtful and pragmatic approach. It's about taking accountability for your problems and changing the culture to be tough and competent. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that, because competence, we're all smart. We all are very smart people, and almost everybody in here is smarter than I am. But competence extends beyond our academic training. It means going outside of our area of expertise, going outside of our geography, and it certainly means going outside of our comfort zones. We need to do this to discover new and more valuable ways of thinking and solving our problems. We have to understand what's happening in the real world, how things are changing. You must realize that for the first time, you now have competition outside of your traditional academic models. You need to understand what competitors are emerging. How are they evolving? How are they reinventing their delivery models? How are they servicing students? Now that brings me to my definition of toughness. I'm not saying go around and just knock each other out, knock each other down, not that. When I say be tough, I'm referring to honing your tolerance for high-risk decisions and accepting the fact that personal sacrifice will be required. That's me. Let me take a breath. That was my let me take a breath sign. I knew I would need one. But as you can probably tell, I'm so deeply passionate about this topic. And I'm fully aware that when I speak, not everyone will agree. However, if my remarks spark dialogue and spur action to help young people in our communities and across our country then I'll continue to be the champion for the unpopular position. See, I have to be a champion because these students are working to overcome the challenges that I faced in my own life. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, beyond that resume, that bio that you heard. Long after becoming an adult, I found a letter that I wrote to President Reagan when I was just 12 years old. It detailed my great displeasure with the transportation problems we were faced with in Chicago. Now, in my very well thought out 12-year-old mind, I had a simple solution that I felt would be easy for the president to implement, given his far-reaching power to make things happen quickly. Now, needless to say, it didn't work out that way. My grandmother, mother, or father never mailed a letter. But in hindsight, that moment may just have been the spark of my activist mindset. Now, I won't tell my mother you laughed at her shoes and her wig. Her shoes are red and her purse. But you see, my teenage years served a healthy dose of challenges. While growing up in the Henry Horner projects on the west side of Chicago, both my parents struggled with substance abuse. Now, through the grace of God, they're both living and doing well today, but not before it took a toll on our family. I dropped out of high school and eventually found myself living on the streets with little hope for a future. And after watching many of my friends end up in jail or die, I knew that my future would be no different unless I became my own advocate. But I also knew and realized that the only path to a better life for me was that of a quality education. But I kept thinking to myself, this can't be it. I want more from my life. I'm better than this. I want a real job. So filled with a lot of determination, hope, and I had a passion for technology, I signed up for a 6-month, what was then a trade school. They call them something else now, but back then they were trade schools. Now this school promised me in just 6 months, they would harness my passion and lead me towards a career in computers. And I thought, now this is it. Who needs to go to school for 4 years when I can do this thing in 6 months? Well, here's the spoiler alert. It didn't work. After 6 months, I was no more prepared coming out than I was going in. I walked away with a handful of useless certificates, no job offers, and debt. See, people, this is why we need urgency, because this is still the story of so many students. Now, this was an early setback in my journey, but I refused to give up on my passion for computer science and programming. I wanted to attend the Illinois Institute of Technology, but I didn't have a lot of support. I was told things like, girl, forget it. Have you lost your mind? You won't get in. It's too expensive and one of the best schools for computer science. You're a high school dropout from the west side of Chicago. See, this is why we need to resist that common refrain that our students can't succeed because they have homes, because they in property, because they have families, because they're working. All that is true. But they also have resilience. They also have grit. They also have determination. Our students are not failing because of their problems. If we do what we need to do to fix our institutions and support them along the way, they can overcome all of that. Now, while going to school full-time at Olive Harvey Community College, I worked any job I could find. And after earning my associate's degree, I not only attended IIT, but I graduated with honors, earning my bachelor's of science in computer science. So you see, this high school dropout from the West Side later went on to earn master's degrees, eventually my MBA, and with some hard work, I was promoted to vice president at a Fortune 500 company, and later became the chancellor of City Colleges of Chicago, the same school which gave me my start in life. And as you've heard, most recently authored a new book that was published by Harvard Education Press, which chronicles my tenure at City Colleges. So that's my story. It's a big part of why the activist spirit of that 12-year-old girl is standing in front of you today. I'm here because my story is the story of so many of your students. I'm here because I know the challenges of leading and driving change in minority servicing institutions. And I'm here because statistics tell me that HBCUs are right to either lead disruption or to be disrupted. Let's consider the following. HBCUs enroll 10% of all African American undergraduates. HBCUs produce 17% of all African American college graduates. HBCUs generate 24% of all bachelor's degrees in science, engineering, math, and technology fields earned by African Americans annually. At the same time, all of us in this room know that HBCUs have the potential to dramatically shift the lives of the students who attend them. Just recently, the American Council on Education published a report based on the highly cited data from the Equality Opportunity Project. Now get this is so very powerful. The paper concluded that income mobility rates tend to be 2 to 3 times higher at minority servicing institutions than at non-minority serving ones. See, this makes that earlier point so much more powerful. In other words, HBCUs are vastly more effective at lifting their students out of poverty than other institutions. But what about this perceived value that I talked about earlier? The higher rates occur despite the fact that you're servicing some of the country's most vulnerable students. This was cited in the paper. The study also noted that it's often done with relatively limited budgets. That's a powerful story. So from the beginning, HBCUs have played a vital role in shrinking the equity gaps that students of color face before, after, and during their time in college. But those gaps still persist stubbornly, so our work is nowhere near done. And as education emerges as the new civil rights movement, you will assume an even greater responsibility of not just shrinking, but eliminating achievement and equity gaps. You offer one of the few opportunities for social mobility for low-income first-generation college students. HBCUs were born from disruption. Now is the time for you to embrace that legacy. So how can HBCUs drive purposeful disruption using the Krantz dictum of being tough and competent? 1, purposefully collaborate. See, we all got a lot of partnerships. We have tons and tons of partnerships. But are those partnerships intentional on the strategies that you're trying to achieve? Are your partnerships representative of your regional labor market job growth from now to the next decade? Purposefully collaborate. Combine different perspectives to create new solutions. When I was chancellor at City Colleges, I invited employers who helped us reshape our curriculum, inform our capital investments, educators, administrators, and community leaders who served on focused task forces. Internally, I brought in people with MBAs, change management consultants, to help us develop and implement new solutions to challenges we faced. And as a result, we were able to drive some transformational change that almost tripled the graduation rate by the end of our tenure, but we still had a long way to go. So as you continue on this journey, remember Grant's directive to be tough. Be willing to take those high risks. Be willing to make some personal sacrifice. Let me tell you, driving change is hard. Really hard. But doing so as a Black woman with a non-traditional background against an entrenched, politicized culture was no easy feat. See, I'm still wearing some of those battle scars. Misogyny, direct and subtle racism, overt obstructionism, those become routine battles that I have to fight. And you know what? That's been my truth my entire life as a Black woman in America. I might have to fight that battle at the grocery store. But I tell you this, that may have been my truth, but that will not be my story. And it's never going to stop me from achieving my goals. And it certainly won't stop me from fighting for those who come behind me. I won't let it, and I firmly believe that you, your students, your faculty, your staff, you can't let it either. That's why I always share this cautionary note. While collaboration is vital, especially in higher education with its history of shared governance, it cannot be the end product of our efforts. Leaders should strive for consensus. Strive for that. But you also need to know when to move forward for the sake of your students and to hold others accountable for doing the same. See, focusing on 100% consensus instead of accountability could lead to continued inertia, not the change we so desperately need for our students. So that brings me to number 2. Make constant change a part of your DNA. We live in a world of constant change. Change is the one thing that's guaranteed: that, death, and taxes. Change is the new norm that our sector must learn to live with and adapt to. To survive and thrive, we must develop infrastructures that allow us to constantly monitor and engage based on what's evolving in the environment around us. We must revamp our systems and structures to changing the way our institutions operate in ways that challenge business as usual. Continuous change informed by real-world data must be a part of your DNA, not the one-and-done processes. Now, according to a recent study by the Center on Education and the Workforce at Georgetown University, there will be 165 million jobs in the economy by 2020. It's 2018 now. And 65% of those positions will require some form of post-secondary education. To be successful and to help our students compete for these jobs, purposeful disruption and continuous change must be at the top of our agenda. So that brings me to 3 and finally. There are no sacred cows. Everything is worth challenging. HBCUs have the ability to be among the most nimble institutions within the higher education sector. You have the ability to innovate and reform much more quickly in order to keep up with the rapid changes in our labor market. But like leaders in other disruptive organizations, you will need to be persistent in the face of those who want to keep doing things the way things have always been done. And if there are no sacred cows, there are no sacred policies, no sacred positions, no sacred practice. Everything is worth challenging. Everything is worth exploring. Everything is worth evaluating. Remember, we're trying to create new models. And please know, there is no law of nature that can compel institutions to change. It comes down to leadership, management, and establishing the right framework for operational and cultural change. Having a framework and infrastructure to guide continuous change is important for many reasons, but one of the most important is because it provides continuity. A clear vision backed by real-world data on progress is what's needed to help escape the temptation of pursuing the flavor of the month when it comes to reform. You must marry an overarching vision with practical, innovative solutions that reflect the realities that our students face both on and off your campuses. Sacred cows will limit your innovation. So as you return to your respective schools, I urge you to keep Crance's 2 words, tough and competent, at the forefront of your thinking. And more than anything else, you must decide whether you're living up to the Krantz dictum. That was something Gene Krantz worried about long after his tenure at NASA ended. At the turn of the century, decades after NASA had met its audacious goal of sending man to the moon, he was asked if the agency had managed to maintain the culture he had worked so hard to put in place. Here's what he said. In many ways, we have the young people, we have the talent, we have the imagination, we have the technology, but I don't believe we have the leadership and the willingness to accept risk to achieve great goals. But that's where you come in. Be tough, be competent, but above all, be fearless at taking risks. Risk to drive the kind of disruption that can change the trajectory of the lives of the students you serve. After all, if we don't collectively commit to lead purposeful disruption, in less time than you might think, you and your institutions could become victims of it. So I'll leave you with this, and these words may sound quite familiar. The world won't get no better if we just let it be. We got to change it, y'all. Just you and me.